Welcome back to another episode. And today we're fortunate again to have Andrea on our call again. For those who missed the first episodes, we had already a very long talk about data protection, data privacy, and how to, in general, think about data protection and turn that into a competitive advantage. So, Andrea, welcome back again. How are you doing today?
Oh, fine, Thomas. I'm very happy to be here again to talk about the data protection and GDPR and LGPD here in Brazil. And it's a pleasure to me, and it's very nice to have this topic to start the day. For me, starting, for you, going away in the day, because here in Brazil we are 10 in the morning yet, and for me, it's very nice, and it's a big pleasure to be sharing all these informations with you.
Okay. So today, we thought it would be a good idea to step back for a second and basically lay the ground and talk about some of the basic terms that one needs to know, or at least needs to have heard once before when we talk about data protection, because we have some more topics in our pipeline that we want to talk about. So it's first important to get the ground covered and the lay of the land, so to speak.
Yeah.
So what are some of the key terms that one should have heard when thinking about data protection?
Oh, there are a lot of terms, but the basic ones, for start to talking about it, it's data subject. Who is the owner of the information? Who is the person who is the owner of the data? So when we are talking about the data protection, know who is the data subject is the first point, because the data subject is the human being who has all the data with him. So identify this person, these people in the beginning is very important, for starting to talk about the data protection. All data comes from the data subject.
Oh, that's actually interesting. So, is it right that a data subject always has to be a natural person? So it cannot be a legal person in the sense of data protection, data privacy?
It's always a human being. It's also a person, not a natural person. We're not talking of companies or other kinds of person, just natural ones.
Mm-hmm.
It's why? Because data subject has rights, and it's fundamental rights, and one of it is data protection. So we are talking about the fundamental rights from a human being that are data protection. So all the time that we are talking about data and data protection word of GDPR or LGPD, we are talking about the human beings and their rights with all these kinds of information that comes from your data, not personal data from the human beings. It's very, very important. And for companies, organizations, and other ones, we don't have this protection. The protection is only for human beings. It means to be clear. Yeah.
That's actually very interesting. It sounds very fundamental, almost like the Charter of the Human Rights. And I think already you can feel and sense how important this is. If it's such a fundamental right, then people become more and more aware about it, right?
Yeah.
What else is there to know? So we have the data subject. What other parts of the puzzle?
Yeah. The second one, now it starts the problem for the companies. Not really the problem, but now we are the other parts, other concepts that we need to understand very well. That is the data controller and the joint controller. So the data controller, it's very important for us. It's the person that determines the purpose for which and the means by which personal data is processed. So this, the data controller could be a company, an organization. He decides why and how the personal data should be processed. So it's very important to identify this this part of the relation in the beginning to put the compliance in place. So first step, know who are the data subjects. Second one, who are the data controller. And the data controllers could be data controller, one company, one organization, but could be also joint controllers. When together with one or more organizations, it jointly determines why and how people are processing this kind of personal data. So you could be in one relationship with one data controller or joint controllers that we need to identify them in this relationship. But all the time are these people that are looking for the data. It determines what you'll be doing with this kind of data or of this personal data. It's very, very important. So it's the second point that it could be very clear, and it's kind of difficult sometimes when we are talking about the data controllers to understand the joint controller, because you have joint controllers and now you have the third one, that this is the processor. The processor is not really the joint controller, okay? The joint controller has the power as the same as a data controller. Sometimes more or less, it depends what they are doing, the relationship between the controller and the joint controllers are all them talking about the same question. That's why and how personal data should be processed. But then how data will be processed, or when and in what part of the world, or what kind of processing will be doing by the data, we can put another people in the middle, that is the processor. And then we have the third part. So we have data subjects. Second one, data controllers and joint controllers. And the third one, we have the data processor. And these three is very important one to understand in the relationship.
So that's actually interesting. Now, if we take a very simple example, but which is very common, let's say we have a company that has clients and they come to their website. So they collect some information, but also on the website, they have, for example, Google Analytics installed. No? So in that scenario, we have already these three elements, if I followed your explanation carefully, right? Mm-hmm.
So in this, we can say that in this company that the data that they are collecting for human beings, no, for persons, are the data subject of the personal data. Mm-hmm. The company that are collecting it, it's the data controller. And Amazon or Google, I don't know, the Google Analytics that you said, Google Analytics could be the processor of this relationship.
Yeah, I think there's another interesting concept coming in, which we want to talk about a little bit more in an upcoming episode, which is consent, right? But in a nutshell, it basically means that you can't do anything with customer data that you are collecting if the subject hasn't given a formal explicit consent, right? That's my interpretation of what I have heard so far, no? From you and from other legal experts, no? Is that right?
Exactly, correct. It's very important to understand that when we are talking about personal data, I'm telling you that the personal data belongs to me, a people, a person, or an individual person, and it's important. Why? Because it's my fundamental right. So if you, a company, want to process my data now, you need to ask me or have a kind of authorization by the law to do that. Why? Because it's my property. It's my fundamental rights. No, it's not more as other data that we have. It's a fundamental one, and it could have serious implications in my life. So for processing my data, you need to have an authorization that could be by a consent that we are talking later, but it could be also a legal obligation, a contractual obligation, or other kinds that will give the authorization for the controller or joint controllers to processing these data. Otherwise, he can't.
Okay. So that's another important aspect. So an example for a legal obligation, correct me if I'm wrong, an example would be that as a subject, I can always ask a company, what data have you collected from me, right? That's basically a basic right. No? And so as a company, you need to figure out, how can I tell my clients that came to my website if and what kind of information I have collected from them, no?
Yes, now the law let clear that you need, as a controller, give all informations for the data subject. If the data subject asking you about this, well, what are you doing with my data? You, as a controller, your company as a controller, need to give back all the information you have about this data subject. So it's very important, because sometimes you are collecting data from a consent. As you said, for example, you are a marketing company and then you need a consent to process this data. But in other moments, you are a controller from lots of data, personal data, because the law said you need to do that. For example, for tax and other cases now in your company, you need information about your employees and other stuff.
Exactly.
So at this moment, even in a case for legal information or contractual information that you are using or processing personal data, you need to give back the information for the data subject if they ask you about what you are doing or processing for your information. So it's very important to understand that companies understand that now they need to be up to do this kind of request. So and provide all the information that the data subject could be about your personal data.
Yeah, it's actually interesting, no? Because when you talk about the methods how data are being collected, no? This can be sometimes explicit by, for example, filling out a contact form. In that sense, you need to basically inform the client that data is being collected. But what I also find sometimes when I'm working with companies, they are not even aware that their website is automatically collecting information. No? And it may be necessary, for example, in order to run a security application on the website to make sure that it's protected against hacker, right? But in that sense, it's also collecting information. So I think that brings up another interesting aspect, the agreements that you need to have in place, no? Because that's really the interesting part. Because if you're working with a processor, that entity actually is working with the data that you own, right? So with whom do you need to have a contract in place?
Yeah, it's very important to be very clear terms in your website, for example. Explain for your data subject how you are processing the data. Why? When you are processing data, personal data, you are not doing it alone in this relation, and you need the agreement, you need the consent of the personal data that he is understand what you are doing with it, and all processing need to know. And it's very important, because when we are choosing a processor to be in our relationship, it means that the data is not only with you, collector, no, that is the data controller, but someone else are in the relationship. And the data subject has the right to know that you are working with a processor and what this processor is doing about the information. So let's give an example for us now, because sometimes we are collecting data for normally in a website, you can say, please, you can put your information here in the form, and then you can have my ebook or something like that. And people for them are clear that they are put the data there just to receive the ebook. But lots of time to receive the ebook, you are doing an agreement with your client, and now you need to say clearly, now to be transparent with him. I'm giving the ebook for you, but in the other side, I'm processing your data to take some information that for me are important. And you need to specify how are you doing with this kind of information. For example, I'm doing that for mailing. I'm doing that for know how kind of consumer you are, or knowing more about you. I'm processing your data, and I'm doing this kind of processor using a third part in the relationship that we taking your data, for example, all in the EU, or could be putting these data in another country, a third part country, and your data, when you be processor, will be in United States, or will be in South America, or in India, I don't know. But the data subject needs to know what you are doing with his data in the future when you are check it and process it. It's very important. And for that, you need to complete, you need to be clear about your policies in your website. So when you ask a consent, you ask to say also, please, you need to agree with my policies. Why that? Because in your policy, you are explaining what you will be doing with this, the processing of the data, the personal data. So it could be clear, and it could be something, it should be something very easy to access for the data subject. And it's the first step you need to have.
Yeah, I think that's great. Now, before we basically recap what we're doing, I just want to highlight one thing. When we started this series, we had a discussion, of course, and we asked, okay, why are we doing this? No? And the purpose is to help companies who have to solve these problems. And what I find always interesting when you talk with companies and you ask them, okay, how do you manage your data protection topics, etc. And sometimes they say, oh, it's not important for us. We are here in this or that country. Yeah, of course, we're selling in, let's say, for example, European companies or European countries, or to Latin America, and vice versa. No? But that's actually a complete misunderstanding. No? Even though you may not be having a legal location, a physical location in one of the, for example, the European Union countries, but if you have customers there, you still need to comply with the data protection regulations, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. No?
Yes, exactly.
And probably Brazil as well. No? So
yes, because one point that people sometimes make a mistake or not good understand, that there are two kinds of problems to resolve when you have data protection. We have the problems with contract, and you have the fundamental rights. So when I have a problem that, I'm with my processor, I have a data breach and it's not the place of my country, I have a contract to solve and find a solution. It's this one problem with data could be involved. But if the data subject feels that something is disturbing his rights, he could be directly to the court asking for your reparation. So you could have at the same time too big injury to take care. So it to be very clear in our policies, because one is the contract and the other is the personal right. So we need to give for the data subject what he needs for your contractual relationship with the company or the website. But we need to know also that it's a fundamental right. And if there's some violations in your contract, otherwise he can reclaim, he can find or go to the court or do something else, even he signed a contract. So we need this balance, and for that, the policy is very clear, no?
Well, there's a good news in all of this, no? Everybody has to solve the same problem, right? I learned this early in my career when I was talking to a CEO of one of the big companies I worked for, no? And he said, "Oh, Thomas, don't worry. Everybody has to solve the same problems. We just have to be a little bit better than the other guys to solve the same problems."
Exactly.
So, and I think in the spirit of turning this, let's say, these requirements or compliance requirements into competitive advantage, that's the whole idea, no? That's why we're discussing this, to bring some clarity in this. Of course, everybody who is working on a data protection topic has to engage, let's say, a legal advice to finally make sure if to what degree the company is exposed and where it can be better, no? So just to recap a couple of things we learned from our discussion today, which I found very interesting. So we have different terms here, like the data subject, the data controller or joint controllers, the processor, and we have other concepts such as the legal obligation or the consent that has to be collected and given by the data subject. But also what the company really also needs to pay attention to is to have a policy in place as not as a living document, I would say, not just as a plaque on the wall, but to reflect it in the processes and to have agreements, I think specifically data processing agreements. So that would be something that's a core advice to companies.
Yeah, it's very important for the companies, yeah. Perfect.
Fantastic. Andrea, thank you very much for such an interesting talk. I can't wait to talk about the other topics. And I know that marketing people are really keen on understanding what do they have to do and how can they actually optimize and get more consent. So what are the key ingredients to get more consent? I think that will be one of the upcoming episodes. So for those of you who have questions, as always, you can send a question or a suggestion of a topic or an aspect we should cover here. You can do this either on the anchor.fm page of this podcast or just send an email via our website. So, Andrea, thank you very much. I know it's been a long week for everybody, an exciting week, and I wish you a great weekend.
Well, you too. Thank you, Thomas, again, and I hope to see you soon.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Ciao.